making sure that the live stream is actually working. And yes, it looks like we're good, Frank. You're good to go.
Okay, great. So welcome back to the full group. We're excited about having the opportunity to hear some of the responses and feedback that were provided in the breakout sessions during the first hour of this meeting. I want to first take the opportunity to thank members of our SGC who have provided their schools with many hours of service. Earlier this year, the SGCs met and began to design for a portrait of the MPS graduate and how their school's vision and improvement plans would ultimately serve to align the eventual MPS portrait of a graduate. We anticipate continuing this important work under the leadership of Dr. Estrella, Norwalk's next superintendent. When members of the Board of Education decided to design a policy that would allow for an SGC at each school, this dates back to 2015, it also required by policy for the co-chairs of the SGCs to convene annually with the Board of Education in order to provide the board with information and general feedback that would help to inform the board in making decisions concerning the school district. Tonight, we continue to carry on that tradition, and it's in a much different format, but we have been able to come together again to express answers to some very pivotal questions that we need answers to before we can move forward together as a district. So I want to again thank you for the time and effort that you've put in volunteer hours to this school governance council role. You were probably told during the breakout that your facilitator was also attempting to take notes, and the three facilitators have that grid in front of them. And what I'd like to be able to do is for one of the three of us to be able to share our screen so that everyone in this Zoom conference can take a look at the data that's been collected. And then we start to go through the three questions together.
Frank, before we do that, I think have to actually call the meeting to order now that we are back.
That's very true. And the Pledge of Allegiance.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's do that, but it's perfect because it's exactly 7 o'clock right now. So let's call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we can get into our agenda items. Let's start the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So now that we're really meeting, we can move into our agenda items, and we actually have two very special honorings of people in our school community that are this week. We have Nurse Appreciation Day, and then we have Teacher Appreciation Week. So I don't know, Dr. Adamowski, did you want to say anything about either of those things? Or
well, I think that this comes at a sorry, I'm muted here. Yes, okay, so I think this comes at a time when these recognitions take on very special meaning. And I know in our breakout group earlier, we talked about some of the incredible efforts that our teachers and other members of our staff, nurses in particular, have been giving to this effort. So, these types of recognitions, they run the risk of being something that we just celebrate at the time. But I don't think there's ever been a time when there's greater gratitude for our teachers who have stepped up and made the distance learning effort work to the greatest extent possible. So this board resolution attempts to express that. I also just want to say a word about our nurses. Our nurses are part of the skeleton crew that was staffing our schools until recently, and will be staffing our schools again on May 16th. During the time we shut down, many of them were lent to the Norwalk Health Department, where they were doing tracing, COVID virus tracing. And our nurses just have been rocks that have just performed incredibly well under the leadership of their leader, Joanne Malinowski. And they have been just a source of comfort and expertise and confidence to all of us as we have tried to navigate this. So thank you to our teachers who have made distance learning work, and thank you to our nurses for the great service that they provide, but particularly during this troubled time.
Yes, absolutely. And on behalf of the board, I would like to say the most heartfelt and genuine thank you to the teachers and also to the nurses. That can come from anyone's heart. I think that those of us who have children in the system have witnessed firsthand the amazing work and dedication and caring that has gone into the distance learning as it's been developed. And I don't know, how many times can you say thank you? Like, that's how many times we'll say thank you. And I also would like to express appreciation on the behalf of the board to the city, to the BET and the mayor for providing resources for technology for the next phase of distance learning for our youngest learners, because that's going to make a huge difference for them. So shall we move into our discussion point? Frank?
Yes.
Sarah, do you want to pass those resolutions?
Oh, do we have to vote on them? I didn't realize.
I believe so.
Okay. May I please have a motion to adopt recognition? Barbara, and a second as well?
I second.
Okay. All in favor of adopting the recognition of Nurse Appreciation Day, May 6, 2020? Aye.
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 That sounds unanimous to me.
Yep.
May I please have a motion to recognize Teacher Appreciation Week from May 4th to May 8th, 2020?
Aye. So moved.
Yes.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 That also sounds unanimous to me. Okay, thank you, friends. Sorry about that. I didn't realize we had to actually vote. Okay, Frank, take it away.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to attempt to screen share here. Let's see. Google GC. And let me know if everyone is able to see the graphic here. Is that available to you to see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Looks good.
Okay, so you can see here we have the 3 questions at the top of the grid, and we've created an organizer with high school, middle, and elementary school. And we've got the 3 questions listed to the left of each level. And so I hope that this can be an organic conversation. Let's start with the first question. Initially hear from one person in each group to discuss some of what was shared. And then we will move into the second question. Please feel free to be able to offer a question or a comment in addition to what you see in your group's field here. And we're hoping that some of this will help to inform the board in terms of decisions it needs to make going forward with respect to managing school governance councils and this year's school-based budget.
Frank, can we make it a little bit larger so we could see it a little bit clearer,
Oh,
if you don't mind?
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't know how much that helped, but let's do.
Full screen on that tab, maybe? Oh, there you go.
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. So why don't we start at the elementary level with respect to the first question. Strengths, weaknesses, next level of work. Do we have somebody that can provide us with a summary of what you all discussed?
Kim, is Kim still here? Kim Hager-Miller offered to go. Oh, great, we lost our speaker.
Uh-oh.
Hold on. Oh, I hear her. Kim, you're on mute. Thank you,
Tell me that
Kim.
would make it better if I muted myself.
No.
I'm sorry, I took notes by school. So really quickly, Brookside has dedicated, committed, respectful new members. Too many training meetings was a comment. Cranberry, rather to just get down to what we need to do at our school. Cranberry, dedicated members, good at consensus. Weakness doesn't reflect the population, and they are having trouble finding a community member. Columbus, good common shared purpose, moving to K through 8. Goal is to unify the school, upper, lower, and that's their next level of work. Fox Run, good at demonstrating their voice as an SGC, dedicated people, good mix of expertise. Weakness is new members, unclear role, understanding of roles. Hoping to set goals and objectives and work on their school improvement development plan. Jefferson, SGC, working hard, good attendance. Their big issue is the move to Ponus, but didn't really feel any great weaknesses. Marvin, great commitment, shared vision, focus on safety and diversity. Weakness, they are lacking parent members on their SGC. Naramick, strengths, great group, a lot of parent involvement. Wonderful. Coordinated with the PTA. They attended SGC meetings and vice versa. And their new cafeteria project went well. Did not see any great weaknesses. Silvermine, great communication and consensus. Parent involvement, great. Felt they were more productive this year. Weakness is lack of diversity in their representation. Tracy, positive, diverse group. Met twice a month, which I think is nice. Leadership, great, complements each other. Weaknesses, not much. Seek stronger public presence and food choices. Wolf Pet, pleased at, no, their problem is weakness, they would like more diversity on the SGC. They have no community member and are lacking in parent members. Positively, they're working to transition to an arts-based school, and they are hoping lead to more community commitment. Kendall says they have a new team. It took time to get to know, and they are working on their above the bar plan. Rowayton has a negative of not diverse members, are working on more subcommittees, thinking that will accomplish more. That's it. Anybody need clarification on my sketchy notes?
If I can just jump in, Frank, and say, as a board member who was just listening, what seemed to jump out as a theme insofar as there was commonality among the schools was new board members felt like they needed more direction in how to be on the SGCs, like clarity of expectations and roles. There were a couple of schools that seemed to have specific issues to their own school building. And then recruitment seems to also be a perennial trouble for people, getting people who are able to
be a part of the SGC, is what it sounded like to me.
Thank you, Sarah. And Kim, thank you for sharing. Let's move to the middle school level. Do we have a reporter that can share out? Or Brenda Williams, if you're able to. Do we have Brenda Williams on the call?
Uh-oh.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I had 2 mutes on. There was a lot of commonalities that I think were shared a lot by the PONUS folks. So if Damon or Linda could sort of walk through some of their strengths a little bit and their weaknesses and what they're working on next, I think we'll cover a lot of those as well as some of the notes. Damon, would you be willing to do that?
No problem. Good evening, everyone. When we started at PONUS, we talked about in the beginning of the year, because we have 3 large parent groups, we had a large meeting with our SGC, our PTO, and our Hispanic parent group. And it was important that we had this joint meeting so we can draw the lines and roles and expectations of each group. So families knew what they were going to join into as the year progressed. We all know that the SGC is an elected body, but our PTO and our Hispanic parent group are meetings that are open and available to everyone. So that's something that we did at the beginning of the year, so everyone had a clear direction of what they wanted to do. Our SGC, along with the other SGCs, our focus is on social emotional learning and how we can better impact our students to make sure that they're doing everything that they can from an social emotional standpoint, and everything we can do as a school to make sure we're meeting the needs of those students so then they can access their academic arenas. We always say at PONUS that we want to emphasize relationships before content, not instead of content. We want to do relationships before content to make sure that we're making sure we're working with all of our students and our families. One of our weaknesses, I'll say, was we only met for an hour, and it was hard to follow through based on all the ideas that we had in that meeting, in that hour. So we did begin a school compact this year with our SGC. And what we did, we invited all of our parent bodies as an SGC, after we developed this compact. We invited our Hispanic parent group, we invited our PTO, we invited students, members from our student council. We had a large meeting in our cafeteria. We had food that always draws people. And we had copies of our compact in both English and Spanish. And we asked for input. Due to COVID-19, we weren't able to complete our compact, but we're looking forward to doing that as we begin the school year next year. Linda, if you have anything to add, please jump in.
No, I'm good. You covered everything I would have said, so that was perfect.
Yeah, and I think that some of the thank you, Damon. Some of the commonalities that Damon did there, the social emotional was a major focus, and I think all 4 of the schools, one of the commonalities is the concern about how they're going to support students coming back into school when we do get back into school, the social emotional aspect of that. So that is part of their next level of work, including the finalizing their compacts, which many did not get to finishing because of the coronavirus interruption this year.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Lewis and team.
Thank you.
I'll add a couple of quick comments and then ask if anyone in my group would like to add on. I think that it's fair to say that inconsistency this year would be a pattern that emerged at the high school level. Some of that has to do with the abrupt and sudden closure of the schools, but to some degree, schools also talked about a couple of missed meetings. In one case, SGC meetings occurring and being scheduled on the same night as Board of Ed meetings, which caused some conflict. Overall, there were a lot of well-defined plans and expectations for the year, but there was a sense that much of it was not fulfilled because of the unique year that we had. Another point that we heard more than once among high schools is that the SGCs, with the exception of, I believe, one school, do not represent the student population. There's a lack of diversity on the SGC, and I think we've heard that now at the elementary and at the middle school level as well. So I think we have a system-wide area that we need to take a closer look at as we move forward. You know, I don't know that I heard much about a recruitment issue with respect to parents or staff, but I'll defer at this point to anyone in my high school group that would like to speak on that recruitment point or anything else that you think I may have missed or that you would like to share before we move on to the second question. Okay, hearing none, I think we'll shift to our next question here.
Frank, actually, before you do, I would like to just say something that I had as a thought in terms of
Sure.
representation of the school population on the SGCs, which is a problem system-wide. I think participation in systems of governance is limited to people who have the free time to not be working to be able to participate. And so, you know, I think it's a historical problem, but one of the things that has been helpful on the board is to have people be able to participate in meetings remotely. And so I wonder if that's something that SGCs have considered. I know when I was on the SGCs that I was on, in the bylaws of those SGCs, it said that if you missed more than a particular number of meetings, you couldn't continue to participate. But I wonder if we've thought about opening up participation to include virtual participation too, because that might allow for people who have different work schedules or things like that to be able to participate.
I think that that's a really good idea. It's not something that any of us have thought of up until this point, but I think it would make good sense to extend down to the SGCs. And I would bet that would pick up attendance for SGC participation at meetings. To that point, there was an SGC, I believe it was Norwalk High School, that had stated it opens its meeting by allowing the public to share, or public within the Norwalk High School community, to share any pertinent issues that it feels it needs to, similar to the way our board meets. And while that may or may not be exactly the way each school may want to do it, my understanding of the policy is that anybody in that school community can attend the meeting as a non-participant. So each school should have some seating available in the space where the SGC is meeting, because it is a public meeting and notes should be taken and published on a regular basis.
Frank, can I just add one more thing onto that before we move on? Thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up. I think that's something that maybe all the school governance councils might want to look at a little bit more closely, just to get more active participation. And I think we have a very vibrant school governance council in all of our schools, but I think especially now, given the culture that we're in at this moment, we might want to look at that further as far as remote and having even more active participation.
Thank you, Heidi. Okay, let's segue now into the next question. And this is on the feedback that school governance councils had relative to our distance learning model. And let's this time start at the middle school level, and then high school, and then elementary last. So our middle school group, could you talk to us about how that experience is going?
I'm happy to volunteer. This is Betsy Metler at Roden Middle School.
Hey, Betsy.
Hi. I think every SGC co-chair who spoke wanted to make sure everyone knew how our staff and our administration has done an amazing job engaging with our students. So we are over the moon how our teachers are reaching out to our students. There has been a tremendous interaction. We have a lot of population engaging. You know, a lot of our ELL population has more engagement than ever. We spoke a lot about how teachers are adapting very quickly in this environment, and they were up and running that Monday, March 16th. So lots of applause and real gratitude for our teachers and what they've done. There are issues. There are things for us to consider. Technology and the access to Wi-Fi, I think, is still an issue. Not everyone, you know, the concept of inequity between a lot of our population has definitely been raised before, and this is just exacerbating it. And especially in our special needs or high needs, as well as our ELL population. So want to make sure that we are cognizant of that and ways to address it. I think also there were some great initiatives. I think it was Nathan Hale that had an iTutoring, ways to think about getting students who are struggling more touch points with teachers. But in overall sort of uptake initially, things have been phenomenal. And we're very grateful. And obviously with 6 weeks to go, there can be more initiatives, more thinking about how to socially engage our students, how to make them get the most out of what they're doing. Some aren't challenged, which is, you know, one spectrum, and others are too challenged. So continuing to try to balance all of those things is super important.
Betsy, thank you so much. Any other comments on distance learning from the middle school group before we move down to elementary? Okay, we'll move to elementary. And Sandra, if you have someone ready to comment on this?
I think, Kim, were you still going to report on our behalf? Okay, why don't I just take a stab at it? I see Kim, but I think that I can try to do this justice. So I think for the elementary, there were some definite positives and then some concerns. The concerns, I'll start with the positive. The positives have been at just the district's ability to be so proactive and so quick to respond to the closing of schools. Especially the distance learning portion for the kids that have the one-to-one devices. Some of the challenges have been actually meeting the needs of the Zoom appointments and making sure that they're balancing what the student is feeling and what is going on at home with the times that have been allotted for the Zooms. Another challenge has been with not having some pre-recorded lessons. So that has been one of the things that has been brought up as an area for improvement so that the families actually have more flexibility. Another area that was brought up is the difference between the K-12 packets, K-3 packets in the beginning when it was produced at the schools versus when it was produced by the district. There were more unique and more geared towards the school's community and their identity. So there was a little bit of that difference, even though they understood that this was an immense undertaking. Other considerations is to have a more blended model for K-2 and bringing the equity issue to the forefront. So really thinking about students that have the spotty Wi-Fi and don't have regular access the way that other communities do, students that may not have a parent at home that's actually helping them when they're so young in their learning. So some of those considerations also for students that have different needs. So supporting ELL students and supporting students that have an IEP through distance learning were some of the concerns that people still had.
Yeah, and if I could pop on, Sandra, and also say that it seemed to me as I was listening, that the issues of inequity and the Zoom meetings and the technology were sort of interconnected, and we could think about opportunities for asynchronous learning. It sounded like people wanted to be able to have more control over the time when they chose for their children to be able to do the work, and also clarity surrounding expectations for how work would be done or what work would be done and assessed if it were to be assessed. I think I was hearing a lot of lack of clarity surrounding expectations repeated, and also scheduling, technology training for teachers, lack of clarity around expectations. So I think we can put in our minds opportunities for asynchronous learning as a thing.
And Sarah, I think what I heard was it's not only training for teachers, but a concern that there's inconsistency in the teachers' training and technology. So classroom by classroom, school by school, there's inconsistencies that we have to address that again tie back to the inequities. And I also heard a comment that there were growing concerns by teachers after seeing the home environment that their children were in. And it was a real and a raw emotion that I think was brought forth that our teachers are now dealing with, that they've never had to deal with before, that I think that we need to address as part of the social emotional learning, not only for our students, but all the way through, to our teachers.
Yeah, thank you both.
Sure.
And I'll just add at the end that the one loose end that still needs to be tied up is the grading. How is it that we're grading students? And I know that Sarah brought that up in terms of assessment, that there still needs some clarity around that.
Sandra and team, thank you. That also came up in the high school group, this a question around clarity in terms of end of year assessments and grades. But I'll start with some of the warm feedback from the group. By and large felt as though the district got off to a quick start. They noted a decisive plan put in place that got enacted much more quickly than some of our neighboring communities, as well as districts in other parts of Connecticut, and that routines got set earlier than in most other cases. We had folks also say that the synchronous and asynchronous learning, that blend of structure and flexibility in the daily remote learning day is necessary and one of the most effective elements of a remote plan thus far, and that we ought to maintain that combination of structure and flexibility. There was also a point made about the 4-hour day more of the 4-hour structured day being about the right time period, amount of time for students who are working from home without the interactions that they would typically have in a classroom. There were several questions, concerns that were raised that I think are worth mentioning here. Betsy at Rhoton addressed a couple of these, one being that there is a lack of Wi-Fi still in parts of the city. There are families that are struggling to get on. And so the inequities really do still stand out in places. High school administrators have been working to reduce those by providing hotspots to those families once they're made aware. There was also a comment that, which I loved, having been on the later high school start time, that the high school students should have started their day a little bit later when we went to remote learning. So I was glad to be able to hear that and share that with you tonight. And then I think the group also mentioned the need for more social emotional learning to be taking place during this remote learning. A couple of individuals talked about the fact that students at home are confronted with challenges like needing to care for siblings, being in charge of the household while both parents are out working. And that can be a challenge when we're trying to engage that same student in their mathematics or their science or what have you. And then we also have students who may lack motivation for whatever reason. And us educators are trained to try and build that motivation in person, face to face. And so being able to pull that off in this environment is something that the group believes has been a real challenge during this distance learning model. But I'll ask if there's anyone in the group that would like to add any additional comments.
Hi, I'm from West Rocks. So I just wanted to also say that I think that we talked about this in our group too, about two parents who are both working from home and have kids from, at different levels, and they're trying to do their work and get through their day and also help their kids through their homework and their day. I have a lot of friends where both are working from home and they have multiple children, and it's been very difficult. I think it's inevitable. I have one friend who we were on a Zoom call with all of our friends. We get together every week, and we were asking how the week was, and she started crying, and we said, what's the matter? And she was like, I just couldn't get through my daughter's homework, with the two boys. I couldn't get through the packet, and I was like, it was just too much for me, and I didn't know what to do. And so I had said, well, did you talk to the teacher? Did you email the teacher and just say, we tried to get through this and we just couldn't get through it? And she was tired. And she said, no, she said, I felt completely embarrassed. And I think that's something also that we don't think about, how the parents are trying to get through this as well. And I also said, I love my kid, but my kid, basically thinks I'm a moron. He doesn't, it's difficult to try and teach your own child. I think we all know that, right? You try and teach your kid, and your kid doesn't want to learn from you. You have different, it's not like going to school. It's like when, oh, I can't believe that, oh, my kid's so well behaved at school. She's not like that at home, because we all, going to someone else, your kids behave differently and better. So I think that's a whole nother struggle for parents that I don't know how we address that, but I do think we need to make sure that parents know that the expectation of the homework and those things are a little bit flexible, and that if they're having trouble with the kids getting through everything, that they have to be able to go to a teacher and say, listen, I'm overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed, we're trying the best we can. And I'm not sure parents were sort of told that. I think that they were just, everything was thrown at them and they were like, now go, so as much as the teachers are trying to help, we are as parents also teaching our children, through this as well. So that's just something to think about.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's me, Sarah. So at the elementary packets that went out, so I have elementary school kiddos and a high schooler, so I don't know any of the middle school materials that have been going out.
Mm-hmm.
And the elementary school packets had letters in the front of them that were lovely from the district, with very gentle communications about, being mindful of taking time for yourself and being gentle with yourself in this time of crisis. I don't remember exactly what they said, but they all had a very reassuring tone. Did the middle school information have any kind of
Well, we didn't have packets. Everything was, the kids just got homework through their teachers individually. That was all done through Chromebooks and computers. So, we got emails from, Mr. Reynolds every week, updating everyone like we normally do. First of all, not everyone reads the emails, I think sometimes people are just, I'm the type of person who's always asking questions. I don't mind that I don't know the answers to everything. So I'm always looking for help, but not everyone is like that.
Yeah.
And I think that, some people would, and their child isn't able to verbalize that through a teacher. Like, I couldn't do this. I couldn't figure this out. I just was overwhelmed with all this homework. I just feel like, you know, I don't know, again, I don't know how we fix that. My kid's very self-motivated. He gets up when he needs to get up. He goes to his classes. I don't have to do much. And, you know, I'm part-time, so I'm not working right now, but I just feel like that's it's a real concern, just like the real concern is now that school is not going back to school. If things start to open up and people have to go back to work, what are they doing with their children?
For
Which
sure.
is a whole nother, and even, I mean, we only have whatever, however many weeks of school left. But if things open up and people have to go back to work, all the camps are closed.
Yeah.
I mean, all of my friends, they all both work and they send their kids to camps. What are we going to do with those kids?
Sure.
So, I mean, that's a big
So,
problem, but I'm just.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking of something that I think I'm hearing from every level, but that it would make sense for us to, if we can, develop a consistent, clear, well-communicated protocol for what parents should do if they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
For what parents and students, even for high school students or whatever,
Yes.
what to do if you can't do your thing.
I feel
Whom
like
to
some
reach
of
out to.
that has come out from Norwalk X. I know I've gotten.
But I mean, just logistically and practically.
Yes.
On a school by school basis.
Right.
If you are a high school student and you cannot do your biology homework, what is the
Right.
protocol? What are you supposed to do during this time? If you are a parent of a fourth grader and your fourth grader is in tears about math and you don't know how to do it because you don't remember, what is your protocol? So I think that would be something that we could think about.
May I chime in with something I think might help everybody? Specials. Specials factor into students' grades. Could we perhaps go to a pass-fail grading for specials and maybe just have the teachers make them fun? That might make our students' lives happier.
So
No pressure of a grade, and maybe they just get to play whatever they want, draw whatever they want, do whatever exercise they want. Just a thought.
Stephen, you had said that you were going to be able to give the board an update about your thoughts about grading guidance on
Yes.
Friday. But I know we had discussed the idea of pass-fail with distinction. That had been something we'd spoken about.
Well, the state has given us a number of options, and they range from, pass-fail to pass-fail and distinction. We're also going to utilize a concept called grade bracing that would enable a student who does the work not to do, they can do better, but they can't do worse than what their grade was when school shut down. This is, I might ask Heidi to say a couple words about this, because this is a component of the emergency closure distance learning policy that the policy committee is currently finalizing.
Oh, great.
Hi, everyone. I'll probably have Frank, Dr. Costanzo jump in as well, but we've had 3 meetings. It looks as if we're going to have another meeting on this policy on distance learning. So we've got a lot of work ahead. We collaborated with Brenda Myers, Yvette Gurich, the whole policy committee, as well as Frank. And we also looked at different policies, one from New Canaan, which was very sparse, but we looked on working on that, working with that particular policy, as well as from Canton and Portland, Connecticut. We had great input, especially from Brenda Myers. So I don't know if Brenda's here tonight, but a lot of input from her as far as grade bracing and how we wanted to work on that, as well as pass or fail and pass with distinction. So we are still crafting that policy. So Frank, do you want to add in on anything else? And, you know, we really wanted to be very fair. We wanted to make sure that this particular policy was as robust as possible and something that can carry us through. And I think there's been concern, you know, when and if we go back, what virtual learning will look like possibly in the future. And I think we want to be as prepared as possible. And I think that's why we've spent so much time making this policy the best that we can make this at this time. So Frank, do you want to add in on that?
Heidi, if I could just mention, Brenda Brenda Myers had emergency dental surgery at 5 p.m.
Oh, no.
So she's
Sorry.
not going to be with us tonight.
Okay.
Frank, if you could say a little bit more about the grading, the details of the grading issue.
Sure. So we've actually shared the document with Shipman and Goodwin, and that's the board's attorney. And our council has reviewed the policy and has made some recommended changes to the policy committee's current iteration of the whole policy, including the grading policy. The 30,000-foot view was you want to stay within the parameters of the Commissioner of Education's guidance and recommendations. Don't go outside of that if at all possible. And where you're, stating unequivocally that you're going to go ahead and move on something, it really needs to be clear to parents and students what the expectation is. So if we go to a distinction model, we need to really be able to define that. Otherwise, it's not something that we should include. The other advice from our attorneys was that this was a very comprehensive policy and one of the few in the state that have been developed quickly as it has, and that we have to be careful that it's general enough so that it can sustain us in the event that we were to close again in the fall or in the spring of next year. Medical experts have different opinions on this, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that we would see a prolonged closure at some point over the next 18 months. And so we want a policy that will stand the test of time, so to speak. And so you'll see some of those revised discussion points, Heidi, when we hold our next policy committee meeting.
Frank, if I can just interject, we also wanted to make sure, Dr. Adamowski, that this was sustainable. And if we needed to keep adding on to this policy, we would be able to do so. So I think that's one of the reasons for everyone out there listening tonight. We wanted to make sure that we crossed our T's, dotted our I's on this policy. And it's taken quite a while, and we still have more work. As Frank had just mentioned, we had input from our attorney. So we really wanted to make sure legally that we had everything in place as well.
Yes, and let me just, if I could just mention one other thing on this pass-fail issue, which has been recommended by the State Department. The State Department of Education has contacted all the institutions of higher education in Connecticut and also done a sampling of colleges and universities nationally. They are all requesting a pass-fail situation in terms of grading. Because they feel that they cannot rely on, in a distance learning situation, competitive grading. You just can't do it. And that's the reason for grade bracing. And so rank in class, GPA, and wherever you were in terms of grades at the time of the shutdown, you won't go lower than that. If you weren't doing well and you did all your work, you have a chance of doing better.
And that's what we were looking at, Dr. Adamowski, as well. And I also think we wanted to be, with all the input we had, as fair as we could to all of our students. So I think we really want to make this very equitable and very fair. And we realize how hard our students are working under these extreme circumstances, and as well as our teachers and all of the staff from Norwalk Public Schools. So we greatly appreciate everything that they've done so far and continue to do.
So my understanding is at the high school level, our teachers will do final exams again. And the board has a meeting at this 2 weeks from now. And if there are no objections to the first reading of the policy, we will go ahead and prepare to implement that. I don't think you'll actually be have the second reading and approval until June.
Okay.
Dr. May, I'm sorry, I just want to clear one thing up. The final exams were not part of what the policy was. I think we were looking at third and fourth quarter each being 25%, but not doing final exams as part of it.
Thank you, Scott. I should have said exams or assessments as opposed to a final exam.
All right, thank you.
Okay. If I can also just say, I think while the policy is cooking, I think it sounds like there's a need for just a general reassuring sense that the policy is cooking and that it will likely be that, you know, X, Y, and Z based on the guidance from the state regarding the pass fail. Because
Sarah,
yeah.
Sorry, I was going to interject just briefly. Yes, and we plan to have another fourth meeting just because of the recommendations from Attorney Tom Mooney. So it is, yes, we absolutely are crafting it, finishing it up, and then it will be brought to the full board for first read.
For sure. But what I meant was guidance, reassuring, just some kind of reassuring communication from central office that the policy is underway, and that because I feel like the biggest problem that everybody is having that is a through thread of all of these issues that people are raising is anxiety. And so I think anything that we can do to alleviate people's anxiety that they're going to have to do something that they probably are not going to have to do would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Heidi, I think the group would be reassured if we just talk a little bit about the flexibility that we made sure was baked into the policy.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's important to know that's why as a cohesive group, we talked about the flexibility, and that's why we had Yvette Gorichen as well. So we wanted to make sure we had as many central office folks to kind of craft this policy with the policy committee. Again, there's still a little bit more work that needs to be done because of the direction of our attorney, Tom Mooney, but we're in the final stages, I believe, of this. And the policy committee, which I have not even yet advised of, we're still going to need to meet one more time because of the recommendations regarding this policy.
For sure. So maybe it might make sense. Brenda Williams, who I can't see, but to have a communication just for parents and teachers so that they know to be reassured that this is going to be something that will be dealt with in a way that will make their lives and jobs as easy as possible under the circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yes, Sarah, it's Brenda. Yes, absolutely does make sense. Got it.
Cool.
Brenda, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Yep,
Awesome.
sure.
Okay, where are we?
So we're actually on to our last question for the night. And that is concerning input from councils regarding the budget reductions that need to be made and whether or not SGCs would prefer more budget autonomy or not. And I can speak for the high schools first, and then we can go to elementary and middle. There was a consensus in our group that well, two pieces. One, the SGCs do prefer that autonomy and believe that each school has a unique set of circumstances that you know would make for better budget decisions if it could be made at the SGC level. But at the same time, the SGCs are asking the superintendent and the board for parameters, for some guidelines from which to work, and that absent of those guidelines, you know, this could run amok. So autonomy is a yes, but they do want some guidance before making those local decisions. And I'd ask if there's anyone in our group that wants to add anything more specifically, please feel free to do so.
Frank, I'd like to add what I heard from the smaller schools in the breakout session, that they had a concern that the district be at least overseeing the cuts to ensure that the schools with a smaller student body, smaller enrollment, would not be adversely affected by the cuts. So I think that there was an agreement that autonomy would be good, but that we also needed oversight to ensure equity and parity.
Thank you. Anyone else in the high school group that would like to chime in here?
Frank, just to reiterate, I mean, I know that, since the time of site-based budgeting, the McMahon School Governance Council has asked for this autonomy. A cut is a cut, the budget's the budget, what's the number, but give us the autonomy to look at what we're trying to do in the school and figure out how to apply it so that it makes sense for our priorities and for students. That's all.
Thanks, Scott.
Dr. Costanzo, if I may, one of the things that Jennifer Gilchrist and I talked about with our SGC was that there's a 30,000 foot view that the district under Dr. Adamowski's direction has that individual schools do not. And so that is our greatest concern, that while there is an understanding and an agreement, if you will, that SGC should have some control over their budget. The autonomy is critically important because we know what our schools need. However, at the same time, there could be a negative impact on the smaller schools, as was stated by Barbara Myers-Mitchell. So thank you for saying that. The other thing is that the trickle-down effect from school to school when cuts are made could also have a negative impact on smaller schools like CGS and P-TECH. So I just want to be very clear that when we said that we were in favor of Dr. Adamowski and the district looking at potential cuts, that is with the understanding that they have a wider or broader view of the needs of the entire district as opposed to individual schools. And so I hope that that will be taken into consideration as well as the decision is made as to whether or not SGCs will have full control over budget cuts.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. Any last comments in our group?
If I can just add, Frank, just one quick comment. I think it was a really collaborative, great effort tonight with everybody coming together and giving their feedback, what's been working, what hasn't been working, some suggestions. So I think it was very informative this evening. And I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their information and their feedback tonight.
Thank you, Heidi.
If I could interject two things. I'm sorry, I know that Brookside Elementary has a Montessori program, which is virtually impossible to do remotely. So,
hey, Kim, if you could just hang on to that thought for just a moment. I want to make sure that our high school folks have had the opportunity. Does anyone else in the high school group need a moment to speak, or can we move on to elementary?
No, I think we said everything.
Very good. Okay, Kim, the floor is yours.
okay. I would imagine completely impossible to conduct a Montessori program remotely. So and we have all kinds of issues with the Montessori program at Brookside. We lost our one dedicated professional to it. I don't know where it's going. To the extent that we want to support this, I don't know what we can do. What do you think, Frank?
So the question is sustaining the Montessori strand during a reduction period?
I don't see how it can be done remotely. It is a very hands-on program.
That's a very good question. We like to think that we will return to some level of normalcy come
September. Yes, we all hope so.
September. But you do raise a very important question. Now, my guess would be that the experts at Montessori are probably thinking about this question right now and how they can continue to operate in a world where we may be, intermittently going out and coming back in. So, we would certainly be relying on our Montessori consultants, some of the best in the country, Tim Nee in particular, we would be leaning on him and others to make sure that we could maintain the Montessori model, provided that it's making a positive difference for kids, even during remote learning.
And that is incredibly hard to assess right now, but okay, good. I'm happy to hear that we have consultants.
If I can say, related to this, to bring out this thing that's sort of specific to Brookside to the rest of the discussion at the elementary level, I think what I'm hearing actually from everybody is that it's important for SGCs to be able to have autonomy, but that smaller programs or special programs would like a layer of protection so that they don't have to be concerned about the continuation of their programs or the viability of their programs. Does that sound like the thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
While we're on that subject, Sarah, I mean, I'm a Brookside SGC member, but my heart aches for Silvermine with their dual language program. They have to be suffering incredibly. Are there any help out there for them?
Well, I can tell you that in the superintendent's budget recommendations and in his previous budget recommendations, there has been a magnet supplement to any school that is operating a specialized program in the amount of $1,000 per student. And so he's been an ardent defender of maintaining that additional level of funding. In order to run a magnet school, it needs to be different programmatically. And in order to run it well, there needs to be some additional cost to what a standard education program might look like. The other thing worth mentioning is in a couple of rare instances, the central office has had to implement a small school supplement where there is a school that does not have a unique program of study, is not a magnet, and whose enrollment is so low that it needs a base amount of funding to provide the basics, teachers, a principal, custodial crew, nurse, etc. That has also been something the superintendent has kept in mind as he establishes his budget to ensure that each school has at least enough funding to run.
Frank, I'm wondering if Liz Shaheen or someone, one of the parent from Silvermine could answer that question as to how Silvermine is doing with distance learning.
I can jump in and explain just a little bit. Silvermine's not suffering at all. We're rocking and rolling. We're still going. We're still moving forward. We are lucky enough to have flexibility. So we receive the packets that are assembled by the district, but we're also given time to filter through what will work with our biliteracy program, and then we provide all of the Spanish materials ourselves. On speaking on behalf of our teachers, the instructional library that we're building in this process has been pretty impressive, to say the least, in all areas. So when we do move back to brick and mortar school, we're actually very excited at the potential and possibilities of what we've built in the meantime to be able to sustain, especially a blended learning model moving forward over these next months. So Silvermine is we're hanging in there. I think our bigger concern is just the lack of language models. That's a cornerstone to our program. I think that's the thing that's missing. Our students are not with strong opposite language peers all day long for that modeling. And so we just have to get creative as far as how we can get the students to use their second language while at home.
Ms. Shaheen, thank you. And Kim, thank you for the specific questions relative to Brookside and Silvermine. Is there anyone in the group that wants to speak to the general question that we asked and anything that Kim may not have covered?
This is Heather from Cranberry. I just have a question in terms of expanding on the social emotional learning that we were discussing in all of the groups. There are, of course, many children who are going to transition from one school to another, or that maybe have social work as part of their IEP. And I'm just wondering how we think we might be able to carry forward services remotely that might assist children who are transitioning from one school to another, or that are having, you know, some anxiety or stress about what's happening.
I have some ideas, but I'll ask first if Yvette Gorovich is on the call. Our Chief of Specialized Learning may want to respond to that. Yvette? I don't know if we have Yvette on this call, but I think one thing that we need to consider is that these transitions are unnatural for children. And when I studied and researched my dissertation, I focused on student transients in urban public school districts and how frequent transferring in and out of schools, or you know, you could compare that to students learning from home and then learning from school, can really have a harmful effect on the transient student as well as the classroom. In the case of transients, the classroom remains, but the student is moving around depending upon housing and other conditions. And so student mobility is highly problematic. It results in learning regression, behavioral issues. And I don't know what research has been done that can explain exactly how our current children will benefit or regress from learning at home, learning at school, and potentially if we were to go back out again, what that could mean for students involved.
Yeah, and then also, you know, are we perhaps thinking about some remote summer transition program for elementary kids going into middle school and middle school kids going into high school? Because they're going to have a great deal of anxiety, even more so than other children.
Those points in the K-12 curriculum are the most anxiety laden. And unfortunately, what we have done in the past, we're unable to do this year unless we think about a virtual experience. But our rising fifth graders going to sixth grade in the past have had this really lovely day at the middle school where they're picked up by their school bus at the bus stop where they will be riding into the middle school, and they get to experience the day with the principal and a group of the sixth grade team leaders. They meet the guard and the nurse and eat lunch together. And it really does take the edge off for our incoming sixth graders. That isn't something we're likely going to be able to do unless we get the green light from the commissioner's office that we can do something like that later in the summer, potentially. So we'll certainly look at that. And I'll talk further with my colleagues and think about other ways that we might be able to consider lessening student anxiety as students are transitioning into grade 6 and grade 9.
Frank, if I could just add to that, assuming that, you know, when we look at students going from 5th to 6th, and you know the normal stress that transition would take, and then 8th to 9th again. The good news is, if there is any good news in this picture, is that currently we have the lowest ratio of counselors to students of any district in Fairfield County, I believe in the state of Connecticut. And so assuming we can get through the financial crisis that we're facing with the counselors intact, we do have a high level of counseling services. Some of you are aware that we've taken steps recently to have our counselors counseling more, doing less paperwork, counseling 80% of the time. So, you know, that will be a real asset to our students. But again, these are difficult transitions to begin with, and we should expect they're going to be made even more difficult by the COVID-19 crisis.
If I can jump in and say that I think I had mentioned before that anxiety, everyone's anxiety, is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. That's sort of an amorphous challenge. It's not something that you can look at or put your finger on or, you know, reason with even, really. So I think for all of us, having the positions that we have in our communities, for you as representatives to your SGCs and for our building leaders and administrators and teachers, I think as much as we can model for everyone that this is a different time, that it's okay that it feels different and difficult, and just remind ourselves and everyone else that the entire world is in the same boat right now. It's not that our children here in Norwalk or our families here in Norwalk are the only people that this is happening to. This is happening to children in 90% of the world. And so I think we can help people have a perspective that this is just going to be a different time, and that the expectations are going to be different, and that you know, sometimes just hearing that things are not supposed to be normal can help people feel a little bit better. So, Frank, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to thank the elementary group for providing us with their input on this question, and I'll turn now to our middle school colleagues and ask that you provide us with a takeaway from your breakout tonight.
Frank, basically the middle school groups were all the same in terms of unanimous in wanting autonomy. We briefly discussed whether some guidance would be helpful, and a couple pointed out that they already have the first pass of guidance from the superintendent in his recommendations to the board from the budget cuts. And then there was a question also about whether autonomy and budget reductions, whether that really just means a reduction in the SBB, or is there something else that we're talking about when we're talking about autonomy in the budget reductions. I don't know if anybody else in the group has anything else they want to add to that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Brenda, it sounds like you covered the group's sentiments there. So that concludes our activity for tonight. We appreciate the time that you put into meeting with us tonight to go through these three very pertinent questions. We will further synthesize the notes. We have minutes being taken for this meeting. And this will certainly help the board and the superintendent on making some difficult budget decisions in the coming weeks.
Dr. Costanzo.
Yes.
Actually, on that note, I wanted to ask Adriana Hudson from Tracy Elementary. Around the budget cuts, there has been, I guess, a story circulating that maybe the budget for, or the magnet funding for Tracy might be cut. And I just wanted to know if that is actually something that will happen, and if so, how we can proactively avoid that, because it would definitely take a very big impact on our children, especially after all the hard work that all the Tracy administrators have done and the teachers have done to make sure that Tracy continues to excel.
Thank you for your question. What I will do is ask either Tom Hamilton, our Chief Financial Officer, or Superintendent Adamowski to speak to a response to magnet funding in general. And
Frank, I can just say that there was no cut in magnet funding in the cuts I recommended, either in the budget I recommended to the board and the one they requested, or in the cuts I was forced to recommend. However, I think we have to recognize that the board has to look at the big picture here and has to look at everything. And when you're faced with a cut of 6.1 million, everything is on the table, and the Board of Education will do its very best to balance all of that out and make the best decisions. But currently, there is no recommended cut in magnet funding before the board.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
thank you, Adriana.
So
I will, I'll turn it over to the Madam Chair.
thank you, Frank. Thank you so much for all of this work and all of the work that you continue to do, particularly regarding helping get food to our kids. I continue to be impressed and heartened by that.
Thank you.
For sure. Okay, so
Can I ask one question before we end?
Sure.
How are we going to handle SGC new membership for next year? Is that held off until next year?
I don't know. It's not something that people had thought of. So what I would say is, for SGCs that have members who are coming up for, who are, phasing out of their term of service, I think you'll have to leave it to your individual selves. You guys are autonomously governed by your bylaws. So you, I think, can choose as a body that in this circumstance, you'd like to defer elections. I think that's something that's allowed to do. Frank, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong.
Great.
There is specific language in the policy regarding when elections must occur, and there's also precise language on term lengths. And we ought to be looking at that. I think, Becky, you raise a really important question. We may need to speak to the board about a modification in these circumstances. I don't know what voter turnout would be like if we were relying only on email or an electronic system. So I think we should put our heads together. Most of the schools do their voting of new members in the spring. And this might be a good time to revisit the policy, consider holding all elections in the fall so that they can be done in person, and so that schools are electing members that are going to be with that school for a longer period of time. That could actually solve two problems in one.
Yeah, because that's a real problem, is that you don't get the incoming parents on those boards. It's a missed opportunity, really.
For sure.
It really is. And a policy revision would be needed just to change the window for the elections.
Would it make sense to think about it in terms of like an emergency suspension of the policy rather than having to actually revise something, given that we're in an emergency situation, or does that not make sense?
I think we should act, and we decide offline whether we do that through a procedure.
Okay.
Or whether we have time to revise the current policy.
Sounds good.
Sarah?
Yeah, Michael?
I just wanted to say, we did talk about this at length when the SGCs were originally created, and especially for like middle school, where, you're only there for 3 years and you've got a lot of turnover. And at every level, because you want to include, incoming parents as well as existing parents. So there a lot of thought and a lot of discussion did go into when these elections took place. So I think one level of school, and I can't.
Oh,
Just bringing us back to our full screen.
Mike, you're cut off. Okay, Mike
Mike-
seems to have
Mike
disappeared.
there?
Okay,
Sarah, I just wanted to jump in if I could.
Barbara, I can't see you, but I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. I just wanted to take an opportunity. I know that the board was unable to take up some things that we had wanted to work on in the spring. And I'm sure that has happened for our SGCs as well. And I want to encourage you all to continue to be proactive, meet in the summer if you need to, keep engaging and make sure that you bring those things forward, even under the crazy circumstances that we're managing, because we aren't in the buildings, but we can be planning for when we are.
That's a very good point, Barbara. And I also would personally like to thank all of you for your service. I know that it's a time commitment and it is difficult and challenging to do any kind of committee work, but particularly work that is very important and about which people are so passionate and about which there is significant room for people to disagree. And it sounds like we have a lot of SGCs that are working together really harmoniously and with a lot of dedication and diligence. And so thank you, genuinely thank you. And also, if I could just briefly congratulate my fellow board member, Mr. Colin Hostin, who received an award for his work in education. Is that right, Colin?
That's very kind of you, Sarah. Thank you. Yes, I did get an excellence in teaching recognition today for this academic year. I appreciate that. It's a welcome surprise after a very, very crazy time in the classroom.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Colin.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have absolutely heard the things that you have said. It sounds like there's a lot of common threads, and this will absolutely inform our process of discussion when it comes to our budget recommendations. And so if there is nothing further, I think that we can motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in
Thank you,
favor?
Sarah.
So
Beautiful.
moved.
Aye.
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 It was nice to see everybody.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Happy
Aye.
Cinco de Mayo,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Good night.